all the things popped up on my side, so I think we're good to go. Good afternoon. My name is Sunny Summers. I'm a senior policy advisor and the agency's rules coordinator. I'm going to be your flight attendant for this meeting. What I'll do is to start off with, I'll go through the list of invited RAC members. It looks like at this point we don't have any public members other than an ODA staff member. So basically, RAC's rules advisory committees are intended for RAC members to provide comments to the department on draft rules. We'll take those comments and turn them into proposed rules, which we file with the Oregon Secretary of State, and that opens a formal public comment period, which includes both a written opportunity so folks can email us or go to our rulemaking page where we have a form that they can submit their comments that way. We usually also provide a hearing kind of similar to this format where I take verbal comments from folks. So after this meeting, Dr. Scholes will take your comments into consideration, draft those proposed rules, and we'll get those filed with the Secretary of State. I'm going to put our rulemaking URL in the chat. If you want to go sign up for updates for ODA rulemaking, that's the best way to stay in touch with us. All of the information associated with the rulemaking is posted there, follows it throughout the process, and we have that information available on our website for a year after the rules have been adopted. Yeah, so let's start with the roll call, so to speak. Make sure everybody's mics are working, and then I will turn it over to Ryan. So Morgan Yates.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Hi, I'm Morgan Yates. I'm a farmer. I have dairy goats, sheep, Coturnix quail. I participate in the MPIP program, and I have been in animal exhibition for almost 40 years.
Welcome, Morgan. Lee Letch. Don't see Lee. Dr. Whitaker. I don't see them. Ellie Corthia. I'm bad. I'm sorry.
You're all good. You're all good. It's nobody gets that one right. It's Ellie Courthouse.
Courthouse. Yep.
Doesn't look like it.
And your background is extension?
Yeah, 4-H extension.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Beth Wheeler. I don't see Beth either. Or Leah. We're not striking well here, Ryan. Tim Emerson.
Yeah, I'm Tim Emerson, Tillamook, retired dairy farmer on the Tillamook County Fair Board.
Wonderful. Welcome. Veronica Broadley.
Hey there. I am Oregon Humane Society's legislative representative, and I work in our Humane Law Enforcement Department as the support services manager.
Thank you. And then Kyle Sharpstein.
Hi, that's me. I'm Kyle Sharpstein. I'm the fairgrounds manager for the Clatsop County Fairgrounds in Astoria, Oregon.
Awesome. Thank you all. And so again, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan and we'll go through the rules and then start thinking in the back of your mind, what is the cost of implementing these rule changes? Because that's a question that we have to answer on the paperwork when we submit these to the Secretary of State. So if you can start thinking about that, I'll be asking for that at the end as well.
Okay, thank you, Sunny. I'm going to, if you bear with me just a second, I'm going to share my screen so we can all kind of be looking at the same thing at the same time. And then the process we normally go through is just kind of going rule by rule. So I'll point out that the proposed changes, kind of give a little bit of background on it, and then we'll pause at the end of the rule for any feedback. Some of these, it may feel like a little bit of a painful pause. This first one particularly, we're only added one definition, but we'll still do that just for the formality of making sure that if there's any feedback on that. So the first, a little bit of background on these rules before we start with that. So this is a newly proposed set of rules. While it is new as a permanent rule, it has been in place the last 2 summers in some format of this or another. So the framework of these rules was originally put in place in June of 2024 for the 2024 summer fair season to control highly pathogenic avian influenza. They were implemented again in May of 2025 as temporary rules for Hypath AI and rabbit hemorrhagic disease. And then we actually just put in place a modified version of these last Wednesday, I believe, for the equine herpes virus outbreak. So the intent of this rulemaking is really to stop having to do the yo-yo of having to implement these regulations every time a new disease pops up. The intent of these rules is not to limit or constrain any of the exhibitions that are happening, but really to provide a framework where we can reasonably hope to prevent diseases from being introduced at fairs and exhibitions, but that also if one does happen, that it provides a framework for us to be able to control it and have the information that we need as the Department of Agriculture to trace those disease cases and the exposures without having to paint with a really broad brush, which is, I think that what's going on in the horse world with equine herpes virus across the country right now is a great example. We do not want to be in the business of canceling exhibitions with broad strokes. That's the goal of this, is to give us a framework to deal with diseases in a really surgical manner, so that if we have an exposure that happens at a fair, we can figure out the animals quickly that were exposed, where they went, deal with those exposures, and not have to impact the entire industry. Over the last several years, so I became state vet in 2020. So summer of 2020, we had COVID. Summer of 2021, we were dealing with rabbit hemorrhagic disease, and we had statewide restrictions on rabbits at exhibition. Summer of 22, we were dealing with avian influenza. We had to implement at the last minute statewide restrictions on poultry showing at fairs. 23, we had poultry restrictions again. 2024, we were staring down the barrel of poultry and dairy cattle. So that's when we came up with this as a framework. And it's been very successful the last 2 summers from our standpoint in terms of being able to allow those exhibitions to happen. We have not had to have any species-based restrictions. And in the few cases of diseases that we've had, we've been able to address at the fair in a very limited manner, where in most cases, even the exhibitors at the fair didn't even know what was going on. And that's really the goal here, is to give us that framework to protect animals, protect public health without having to take really broad restrictions. So with that, the first set of changes, so this rule is already a pre-existing rule. It's the main definitions rule for our entire animal disease control chapter. So we're not modifying it. We use a lot of these definitions. One of them that's important to note, because it does apply quite a bit, is we use the term livestock, but livestock means a whole list of animals, including any vertebrate in captivity. I'm not sure why we include the whole list, because we end it with that catch-all. So really, even though traditionally we refer to livestock as a few very specific species, in the case of rules that appear in OAR 603 division 11, that is what the term livestock means. So this does apply to rabbits, it applies to dogs and cats that are being shown at an exhibition. It applies to any captive animal, any captive vertebrate. It does not apply to insects or fish. So the only change that's happening in this definition is adding the term waterfowl. So this is a term we were defining in our temporary rule. Because it really applies pretty broadly, we felt that it was probably more appropriate to just put it into the main definitions in the rule, because we actually do use the term waterfowl in other places in our regulations, but we didn't previously define it. So that's the only change in the definitions. I'll pause there real quick to see if there's any questions, concerns, feedback on that. And Sunny, we do have another.
I was just going to say, I
that just
wanted
joined.
to welcome Dr. Flint. Thank you for joining. If you want to check your mic, Dr. Flint.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
We can, yeah, thank you. So we're just going through the rules, and Brian talks really fast. So he's giving everybody an opportunity at the end of each rule to provide feedback. Definitely raise your hand and I can stop him midstream as well.
Yeah, use that if you're able to use it, that hand raise feature in Teams gets my attention pretty quickly sometimes. Okay, so moving on to the next one. So from here on, you won't see underlining, but from here on, everything is new. There is nothing being modified. This is all new language being added. So if you're familiar with the emergency temporary rules we've had in place in the past, those were done as a single long rule. Everything was placed into one rule because of the way that we enact temporary rules. We are splitting this up into multiple rules by section to make it easier to digest and hopefully a little bit easier to find stuff. And if changes or alterations are need to be made in the future to them, we can do that section by section and not have to change the entire rule. So we do have several definitions that will apply specifically just to these rules, just to these exhibition rules. Most of them are just kind of editorial definitions, the designated contact. The exhibition is one that we have worked really hard with. This has been changed a little bit from the emergency rules we've done in the past to try and capture what an exhibition is a little bit better. So the basis of it is being an event where livestock owned by 2 or more persons are brought to one location or organ for judging, competition, performance, or display kind of remains unchanged. We tried to capture some of the confusion we've had, though, especially related to county fairs and the state fair, where you may have multiple events within a single event. Right, you may have a 4-H show and an FFA show and an open class show that happen separately. Essentially, for the purpose of the rule, we treat those all as a single exhibition. They can be registered together or separately is what we're trying to clarify here. Is if in a specific fair or event, it makes sense for each organization to register themselves separately, that's great. If it makes sense for one person to register the whole thing, great. It can be done either way.
Brian,
Yeah.
I'm wondering, I don't think you mean the livestock are owned by 2 or more persons. I think you mean livestock owned by 2 or more different people, right? You don't mean this horse is owned by myself
Correct.
and Veronica. So I think, and I saw that on social media with the recent temporary, that kind of confuses folks. So you might consider adding different in there somewhere.
Yeah, that's one we were kind of looking at already to figure out a better way of terminology for that. It's interesting. We haven't had that issue the last 2 summers, and then all of a sudden with the equine rules, we started getting that a little bit of confusion there. But there's a few additional terms that are being coined just essentially for the purpose of this, trying to separate out the organizer, essentially there's an organizer, which may mean an individual or association, organization, public body that is actually organizing an exhibition. There's a designated contact that is the point of contact for the exhibition. And then there is a facility owner that actually owns and manages the facility where the exhibition is located. Trying to define those different terms because the different piece of these rules apply to different entities. And so trying to make sure we're being correct and that we're not painting with too broad of a brush and saying that the owner of a facility is responsible for everything that's happening there necessarily. So
Veronica?
For that definition of exhibition, you might also consider using the term possessed instead of owned, as you might have folks who are showing animals on behalf of an owner who is not participating.
perfect. Thank you.
Maybe something that says livestock from 2 or more people.
Okay. Yeah, we'll play with that definition a little bit and see if we can find see if we can find any other places where that's similar terminologies used that we can maybe adopt. Thanks for that. Okay. Any other thoughts on the definitions as we're hanging out there?
So like we were talking previously about the exhibition where it was like in the horse rules at least the display
Mhm.
it trying to be clear like between practices and just someone coming in to I mean the horse is one thing but like the practices or the high school teams and things like that like being clear that those aren't necessarily included in this.
Yeah, and part of that I think will come in through the implementation. We've been looking at the definition, and if there's a way we can do that, and it becomes really difficult to actually come up with a definition that captures all of those things without becoming an entire rule long page long definition of all the inclusions or exclusions. But yeah, that certainly is our intent, that a practice, a training, those kind of events are not included in this. Okay, so moving on to the next rule. This one's a pretty straightforward one. This is the only piece that, and this was part of the reason why we decided to separate out into separate rules. This is the only piece that applies to the owner of a facility. So the person or entity that actually owns the location or manages the location where the exhibition is happening. They are the one that are responsible for initially ensuring that the exhibition is initially registered. The reasoning behind this is because is really for an outreach standpoint, not so much for a enforcement piece. Really, we can do a pretty good job of directly reaching out to the 36 county fairgrounds in the state and the handful of equine facilities that are capable of hosting exhibitions, and be able to do that outreach, work with them, ensure they understand what's going on, they understand the rules, they understand the requirements, and they are the ones that ultimately kind of have the first say over whether that event happens. Right, an organization wants to host a show and they go to the location, they want to have it, enter into some sort of contract. And so at that point, that facility knows that is happening and the dates that it's going to happen. And so that's really the point here, is to ensure that information is getting to the department early on in the process. The intent of that is so that we can then reach out to the event organizers to then work with them to ensure that they understand the requirements, that they have the information they need, they have a veterinarian involved, all of that information. But it allows us to start with a fairly narrowly defined group to do that outreach to ensure that they understand the requirement for registration. So I'll pause there if there's any questions, comments, or feedback. Okay. Next one is the requirement of official identification. So just specifying that essentially the traditional species of livestock, the ones that are already required by federal law to bear official identification, need to have that official ID if they're coming to an exhibition. The official identification is already defined in the definitions in a different rule. So we're not necessarily defining what that is here. And it's actually defined by a reference to federal law of what that official ID is. But specific to these species, cervids really aren't an issue. They're not really allowed in Oregon, but they're included just because they're included in the federal requirements. So the purpose of this is to allow us to be able to trace those livestock if there is a disease outbreak, that we can positively identify those animals and be able to trace them. Go ahead, Morgan.
So in the goat world,
Mhm.
most people pull kids at birth.
Mhm.
And specifically for the minis, such as mini La Manchas, Oberhausleys, Nigerian dwarves, it is very difficult to tattoo them
Mhm.
before 4 weeks old.
Mhm.
Meaning the actual equipment that exists makes it challenging to even do that.
Mhm.
But many of those animals do come to the shows because they're bottle fed, because we pull them from their dams. And so that would be a significant hardship for a number of people because the actual animal isn't large enough to put the equipment to put the tattoo on the animal. And you just can't tattoo goats that you can't ear tag goats that don't have ears.
Yeah, and I certainly understand that. In that case though, there is already a state and a federal law that explicitly requires that scrapie identification to be present both prior to leaving the farm of birth, as well as for any animal that goes to exhibition. And so this here is not actually creating any new requirement for sheep or goats because they are already by both state and federal law required to have that scrapie ID if they are leaving the farm of origin or if they are going to an exhibition.
Okay, I can tell you that doesn't happen.
No, I understand that, but it is a law. I mean, I think my point is that we're not creating a new requirement here. The enforcement of that requirement is a different story, but it is a requirement already.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. I thought that in the past there have been rules for kids that are still of nursing age, at least when we
Nope.
had the national show in Oregon. I can't remember what year it was. I thought that there was a nursing age.
No, so there have been shows that have taken it upon themselves to create carve outs in their own show rules, but that they have never contacted us or USDA to request an exemption to state or federal laws for those.
Okay.
Ellie.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to make it more strict by any means, but I am curious, because for our county fair and everything, we have leg bands on the birds, and so I'm just
Mhm.
curious why, why poultry aren't included in the official identification.
Two reasons. One is so well, I guess both reasons go back to the same. So the definition of official identification is based on 9 CFR Part 86, the federal laws that determine official identification requirements for livestock. Poultry are included in that. So poultry and interstate commerce are included as being required to have official identification. But even in that rule, USDA doesn't actually define what official, like they try to define official identification, but they just they create so many carve outs that there's not actually a requirement for official identification of poultry because it's so difficult. There isn't so official identification typically is something that you can't just purchase yourself, right? So you can't use just an ear tag you buy over the counter at a farm store that says 15. It has to be an actual 840 RFID ear tag. And so there isn't anything like that for poultry. So what ends up being used is a leg band that you purchase over the counter at the feed store. And so that's why that was one that really the enforcement of that becomes almost impossible. And so it didn't feel right to include them as a species when we really can't enforce them. And there isn't really such a thing as official ID in them. So
Makes complete sense.
okay, moving on to the next one. So this one is specific to the exhibition organizer. That is essentially is just requiring that very specific records be kept. And I say very specific in that we are only requiring a very narrow piece of information. Most exhibitions are recording this and probably 10 times this much information in their records. So there is very specific set of records of the animals that we require to be kept, and they have to be retained for 90 days. They don't have to be sent to us. They don't have to be provided to us. They are only required to be made available to us if we request them for the purpose. And the reason we would request them is for the purpose of a disease trace. Oftentimes the disease cases, especially with EHV, we don't find out about them until a week or two afterwards when that animal becomes symptomatic. So it's basically just making sure that after that exhibition's already complete, the animals have all gone home, we can go back to that organizer, find the animals that were there, the ones that were potentially exposed, and go and track them down, make sure those owners are aware, and quarantine if necessary. So the pieces of information are, again, fairly narrow. It's the official identification and other identification present. Typically, this is collected at the time of registration for most shows. The exhibitor contact information, and then the physical address of the premises of origin. This is the one component that is often missing, we're finding in a lot of shows, that the exhibitor information's there, but the fact that those animals are living somewhere else often is not. This was that both of the two events in Texas and Oklahoma that led to this big multi-state equine herpes virus outbreak, both of those events collected exhibitor information. They collected contestant information. They did not collect any information about the animals themselves. And so we've had multiple cases where those states have gotten those information, forwarded us information of, I think we had a total of 8 potential contacts, right? 8 people that listed an Oregon address that were sent to us between the 2 exhibitions. Only 2 of those people's horses actually came from or returned to Oregon. The rest of them, the horses went to another state. So we had to forward those on to the other states. I am left just having to hope that all of the other states did the same and traced, and that there weren't any other animals that potentially had an owner in a different state that came back to Oregon. And so that's really the purpose of that, is to know where those animals themselves. With youth exhibitions also, it's pretty common, and even adults too, right, that people may have their animals housed somewhere else other than where they live. So that's part of that also, is just where does the animal itself live? I honestly, we don't really care about where the exhibitor lives from a standpoint of a disease trace back, unless we have to send them paperwork. And then if there are tests or vaccination requirements that apply to a fair, that those need to be, they need to verify that and have somewhere that that's been verified. There are very few test or vaccination requirements that would apply, but if there are some, you have to keep that. If animals come from out of state, it expands a little bit. Essentially, just that you have to keep the exhibition has to keep a copy of that certificate of veterinary inspection. That's required already. Again, this is not a new requirement. Any livestock entering the state of Oregon from outside of the state are required to have a certificate of veterinary inspection prior to coming in. So it's just keeping a copy of that, even just the document number. The reason for this is because even though we receive copies of all of those, it can take up to 14 days when everyone follows the rules, when the vet submits it to their state and their state turns around and gets it to us in that timeline, which means that we may not have a copy of that paperwork until well after the fact. Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
So this may or may not be an issue, but we have parimutuel horse racing, and those horses stay for months afterwards, and then they move on. So I question whether some of these guys actually have a home, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So is that an issue that you guys need to address, or?
No, because premises of origin is a term we actually define. It's where the animals came from when they came to your location. Right.
Okay.
So that premises of origin may be another county fairgrounds, or it may be Emerald Downs, or it may be, right, it may be another racetrack where they've been for the last 2, 3, 4 weeks. Or it may be a residence. Either way, it's where they came from.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions on that?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So there could be events that we don't necessarily know if they qualify for this. Like we don't know if all the animals are owned by one person. The one that I'm having in mind is like a circus. And so, if we do our part to notify the events that, these rules are in place, where's the line between, you know, making sure that they've done their part on that, or if they come to our facility and then they haven't done it and we don't know if they qualify or not.
Yeah. So again, the only piece that you're responsible for is that initial registration, right? So if you send that initial registration in saying this circus is coming to our fairgrounds at this address during these dates, here's the contact of the person we have for that circus, right? If you've done that, that's all you're responsible for. If you do it in good faith and you think that they might qualify, even if they don't have, even if all of the animals end up being owned by the same person, we're going to, you know, our follow-up happens then with that circus. And if they tell us, yeah, we own every one of these animals, they're all inclusively owned, then great. We don't take it any further. You know, we would always rather have a registration if you think it might qualify, and then we'll follow up. And if it doesn't qualify, then there's no further enforcement or actions. We are also working, I'm actually hoping to have it up by the end of the day today with our equine exhibitions, but we will have a publicly searchable kind of database of the exhibitions that have been registered also, so that everyone can see that and see those exhibitions that, you know, if you're going to a jackpot show, you can see that, yes, they have complied with the requirements. Okay, so the next new rule that's being put in place, again, not really any changes here from the emergency rules we've been doing, but there's just some very basic health requirements. Most of them I think are fairly common sense, but the first one is, and there's a lot of confusion that's happened over the last couple summers, and especially with the equine one. Each exhibition, they has to have at least one designated veterinarian. They do not have to be on site. They just have to be involved in the planning, and really our kind of bar for being involved in the planning, as much as we would like them to be on site, we'd like them to be, you know, in the planning committee meetings and all that. Essentially the level of expectation for us as a minimum level is there's got to be a vet that knows the event is happening and has agreed that they are available to come out if something goes wrong. That's the entire extent of it. They don't have to be under a contract. They don't have to be, you don't have to show that you've had an hour worth of consultation with them. It is just that there has to be a veterinarian that knows it's happening and is able to come out. The main reason for that is because we've had cases in the past where something has happened at a fair, especially in some of our rural counties, where may only be one or two vets in the area, and one's on vacation and the other one's 3 counties away, right? And so now the closest vet is 4 or 5 hours away that can get there. And so that's really the intent behind that, is just making sure that there is a vet that knows the exhibition's happening, and that the exhibition organizers know who the vet is they're going to call if something does go wrong. The next one is a fairly straightforward one that essentially you can't have an animal, you can't allow entry of an animal into the exhibition that is suspected of being infected with, exposed to, or a carrier of a disease. The wording on this is pretty careful, right? The suspected with is because only a veterinarian can actually diagnose a disease in Oregon and so this does not require a diagnosis. The intent here is if it looks like that animal may have a disease or may be infected with or carrying a disease, they can't be at the show. They can't be at the fair. That's kind of the basis of this, that they need to stay home. We tried to word this pretty broadly from the standpoint of we've had some issues over the last couple summers of fairs that have worked with veterinarians to do pre-entry vet checks, and then you get an owner who has an animal that is maybe going to be excluded from fair because they have evidence they may be infected with. A lot of times it's ringworm. And that veterinarian that's doing that health check has made the determination that in their professional opinion, this appears to be an active case. That is the line, right? That's the bar that needs to be set, is that vet has determined they think it is. They don't have to prove it. There doesn't have to be diagnostic testing. We don't have to do that. The purpose of at an exhibition is kind of the old adage of if you hear hoofbeats, think horse, not zebra. It's really the other way around. If they think it could be that disease, that should be enough that animal, we don't take the risk of exposing that animal to all the other ones. Okay. Dr. Flint, I think, has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. So in a number of fairs, the poultry and small mammals come in first, and it's their own teams that are checking them. And then sometimes they'll ask for veterinarians to come through after.
Mhm.
If they suspect animals, they'll set them aside, and it's not really an isolation area. It's just not in
Mhm.
the general exhibition. Is that appropriate, or are we changing that?
Good question. So there's two pieces to that. One is the health checks. As much as I would love to mandate that every fair has a veterinarian doing pre-entry health checks of animals, because I think that is absolutely the gold standard best practice we should all be striving towards. We're not at a point as a profession where I think we can manage that. And so we're not mandating those health checks. We do recommend that. In terms of isolation, yes, we do define isolation here in this next subsection, that they do have to have a designated isolation area. What that isolation area looks like is a little bit up to interpretation and individual situations, but essentially they can't share a confined airspace, panels, fence lines, feeding or watering space with any other livestock not in the isolation area. And then it has to be an area where access can be restricted just to the owners or caretakers, designated show staff, and the vet of record or other vets directly involved. So, right, so just setting them in a cage off to this in a table off to the side is not isolation. That does not have restricted access. Putting some panels up in the far back corner where you can restrict everyone from getting there, you can keep it from being exposed, that could be sufficient. If that corner, though, is the corner of a 12 by 20 tough shed that is your poultry barn at the fairgrounds, that's going to be, that is confined airspace. So not, but having now that outside of there under a pop-up canopy could be, right? So trying to be flexible enough to take into account that there are at least 36 different fairgrounds plus however many additional event spaces that potentially are capable of hosting animals. Trying to start with that bar of you need to have some way to isolate, but not being overly prescriptive where we end up with a rule that, fairgrounds are having to go build a new building to be able to accommodate isolation. The goal is really to work with that designated show veterinarian and come up with that plan. Yeah, go ahead, Morgan.
So traditionally, at least for the Northwest Dairy Goat Show and many of the other club shows that I go to, isolation is in that person's trailer off grounds.
Mhm.
Is that acceptable?
To an extent, yes. We have a lot of exhibitions that use a trailer, whether it is that owner's trailer or, a lot of county fairs where, people may bring their animals and take their trailer back home. We have a number of county fairs that just designate a single trailer as that's going to be their isolation. That's great. Grounds, go ahead.
I don't think that that's great. I think that brings in a lot of possibility of cross-contamination of other diseases such as CAACL and Iones. And that's why we use that individual person's trailer, but not in the barn. When I say off grounds, it's still parked on the site, but it's like in the parking lot as opposed to next to or in the building.
Yes. And yes, the answer to your question is yes, that is an acceptable practice. But the bar that's currently set is that it's just, so it can be a pre-designated trailer, it can be that owner's trailer, it can be whatever that exhibition determines they want to use. Yes, using a common trailer may not be a great practice without cleaning, disinfection, doing all those kind of things in between. But the purpose here is not to set the rules at a gold standard level. It's to set it at a minimum standard level to be able to get that animal out of the exhibition and isolated. The other portion here is that livestock showing signs or symptoms of disease need to be immediately removed. Essentially, if an animal's sick, it's got to be removed to isolation. If the vet is not on grounds, the other intent of this is the intent is not to leave the animal in their pen until the vet sees them. The intent is to get them moved to the isolation area so that we don't have ongoing exposures during that time while the vet is coming to the fairgrounds to look at them. The other piece of this is that the disposition shall be at the sole discretion of the vet of record. The reason for that is we've seen a number of instances over the last year where that veterinarian of record, we've worked with them, and they understand that distinction between the level of where the bar is at for a fair, where we are acting based on concern that it could be something, versus a private vet that may be diagnosing an animal in a barn or pasture on a private premises, where you're usually operating more based on what it likely is. And so we've seen confusion and disagreements arrive where the vet of record has made a determination, but then there has been either another veterinarian or an owner who has previously consulted another veterinarian, or even we've had cases where an extension agent or a superintendent has essentially overridden the decision of that veterinarian to allow an animal that was sent to isolation, was told to go home, and allowed them back in the main exhibition. And so that's kind of the thing here, is that if there is a disagreement, ultimately it's the veterinarian of record that is going to be considered the decision maker there, if there is an issue.
To follow up with that, I about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago at Oregon State Fair, we had a goat that broke its leg, and the veterinarian of record was 2.5 hours away, and the goat needed to be euthanized. It was that bad. The veterinarian of record was 2.5 hours away, and they would not allow that animal to be released until the veterinarian of record was on site. So that is concerning to me, in that I think there should be some accommodation for animals that need to be released that are injured or sick if the veterinarian of record cannot immediately be there.
So none of this has anything to do with injuries. This is solely animals showing signs or symptoms of disease that these rules apply to. And the requirement is that the exhibition have a vet of record that is available. That situation, while unfortunate, occurred prior to any of these rules existing. So that was based on a policy of that fairgrounds, of that exhibition. And that is not the intent of these rules. The intent of these rules is that the vet of record, that there is a vet of record that is available to come to the fairgrounds.
Well, I understand that that's the intent, but if that vet of record is not available because you said they did not have to be at the fairgrounds, what is an acceptable amount of time for an animal to wait to be released is my question. Like if the vet of record is someone in Salem, they can get to the Oregon State Fairgrounds quickly, but at that time, this event happened 7 or 8 years ago, it was the only veterinarian that could be found was out of McMinnville. And so they had to come from McMinnville to this animal. So I guess that's my question. Like how far out does that person have to be? And if the animal needs to be removed, can it be without the veterinarian of record's permission?
No, it can't be without the veterinarian of record's permission. However, that does not mean that the veterinarian of record is the only person who can examine the animal, right? If that's the case, the veterinarian of record can make that determination that someone else has examined the animal, or that this is a situation where an exam isn't needed, right? That's not saying that this rule is not saying anywhere that the veterinarian of record has to do a comprehensive physical exam on the animal prior to making a decision. It's at their discretion, right? So that veterinarian of record can say, I'm 3 hours away. We've got another veterinarian who's a 4-H parent that's there on the grounds. They've taken a look at it. We've talked. I'm going to trust their decision, and we're going to say, yep, send it home. Or they can say, look, this is a situation where we've looked at pictures, we've looked at it over FaceTime, whatever. This is a situation we need to let it go. Or no, we can't send it home because this is a situation where we may be sending an animal that's carrying an infectious disease, sending them back to a farm that may get infected as a secondary infection, and they need to stay there and be quarantined at that location until the Department of Ag, or the state vet, someone can address that. So that's why that veterinarian of record is the one with the sole discretion. That doesn't mean they're the sole input or the sole information source, but they are the one that would be deferred to in those cases.
So what I'm understanding is that a phone conversation would be acceptable if an animal's in need. The veterinarian of record doesn't have to be at the fairgrounds to make a decision if they feel like they have enough information.
We are not prescribing what has to happen. We are just saying that the decision of what to do with those animals is at that veterinary of record's discretion.
Okay.
Whatever that veterinarian of record feels is necessary to make a decision about the disposition we're not prescribing that. That's up to the professional opinion of that veterinarian and what they feel is appropriate under the License Act and their comfort level with the situation.
Do you think there's enough veterinarians in the state of Oregon to be a veterinarian of record for all of the shows that happen in the few months that they happen in the summer?
We have not had any exhibitions contact us over the last 2 summers during which this has been in place to say anything otherwise. We do know there are at least a couple of large animal veterinarians available in every county in the state on a normal basis. I mean, if we find out there's not, that's a situation we can address going forward. But at this point, we've had these rules in place for several show seasons and have not run into that situation.
So has I know that like the club shows, many of which I go to about 10 a year, have not had a veterinarian of record, or they didn't know that they were supposed to. And so is it the facility that's supposed to be find a veterinary record, or is it the person that is putting on the show? I can't remember the word that you used.
The exhibition organizer is responsible for compliance with the rules other than registering the event. Yeah, go ahead, Ellie.
Yeah, just really quick curiosity. So like for county fair, we've actually listed 2 vets because we like large and small animals. We've had trouble finding a vet who's comfortable.
Yeah.
Like, so is that okay that that we're listing 2 just based on animals present?
Yep. Yeah. So the
Perfect.
the regulations said you have to have at least 1 designated veterinarian. There are counties in the state that have so many veterinarians in the county that are wanting to volunteer for their fair that they have a different vet designated for each species. What we recommend at that point is, as an organizer, that you have some sort of conversation among them of who's going to be the final say, because we have seen professional disagreements among them, right? So whether there's one that is the tiebreaker or whoever's designated for each species gets to be but yeah, we're not trying to prescribe that. We're not trying to say you can only have one. We have counties where there may be, maybe a 4 or 5 day fair, and there's a couple of different vets that are willing to participate, but each of them can only really be available on 1 or 2 of those days. Right. And so you have a designated vet for Monday and Tuesday. You've got one for Wednesday, and you've got one that can cover Thursday and another one that covers Friday through Sunday. Right. Does not matter. We're trying to be really broad here to allow for all of those different scenarios. But essentially, you have to have at least a vet that knows the exhibition is happening and is able to respond if needed.
Thank you.
Yeah. So getting into the specific disease requirements right now, this is kind of a placeholder rule with the influenza requirements we've had the last 2 summers. We are leaving these in place for the time being because nothing really has changed in our disease control and the outbreak as a state. But there were carve outs for most of these that meant that the majority of lactating dairy cattle and waterfowl ended up not actually having to be tested last year because of the exemptions. But essentially, for the influenza rules, for influenza susceptible animals, we had some housing requirements that are going to remain in place because the influenza susceptible animals need to have space between different species, so we don't see potential for cross exposures. And then lactating dairy cattle and waterfowl, if they're not already participating in an approved surveillance program, essentially have to be tested negative for influenza 10 days before fair. The reason for that is these two species are both capable of carrying the influenza virus without showing any symptoms. And so that was the impetus behind this. The last 2 summers, when we have required this, the department has paid for the cost of that testing for all of the fairs that have had to do it. So either the department or USDA. So right now that's staying in there because we feel it's important that all of the requirements that are going to apply for the summer, the fairs, be in there now. If something changes in the outbreak and then we make the determination testing is not needed, we will remove that requirement prior to the fair season.
Ryan?
Yeah.
You've got shall be exempted from the testing required under subsection D.
Oh, we did not update the numbering. Okay, I will fix the numbering.
Yeah.
That was from these all being one rule. There's 2 places, so we'll fix that. Okay, so that should be subsection 5 and subsection 4. Okay, and then this is the last section that applies only to exhibitions that are open to the general public. So this does not apply to the the club shows, a lot of the equine exhibitions that are happening right now, those kind of events where it's a show for the purpose of the exhibition, not for the purpose of public engagement. But for like our county fairs and the general exhibitions that are open to the general public, there are some basic zoonotic disease prevention requirements. Essentially that there's be some sort of hand washing station or an alternative hand sanitizing method available. So hand sanitizer near where livestock are housed, right? So at the entrance, exits of barns, by the food court, that kind of stuff. And that there be some signage, essentially that animals can carry germs, eating, drinking, putting things in a person's mouth could cause illness. The basic disease prevention things. We have a template of signs that we've made available that meet all of these requirements. We do not mandate that those are the signs used. You can create whatever you want, but essentially just putting a couple of requirements in there to hopefully mitigate some of the disease risks, the zoonotic disease risks that are inherently present in public exhibitions when we are combining animals with the general public who may not understand animals. And then it's just, reminder that to wash hands as you're leaving. I'll pause there for a second. I didn't realize I had one more rule.
Real quick, Ryan, where do you have those templates?
They are on our website. We have a whole exhibition section of our website where the registration information is, the requirements are, all of our recommendations that kind of compare and contrast what's required and what's a recommended, what's a gold standard. The signage is there in that section as well. All of the resources that we have for exhibitions.
So I hadn't realized that hand sanitizers was acceptable. Is that a change or is that?
It's not. It's not. It may be acceptable. So the thing is that the alternate hand sanitizing methods are up to your local health officer. Most health officers are saying they're perfectly fine with hand sanitizer. But that's not, so hand sanitizing is not actually a recommended method of zoonotic disease prevention, of cross-contamination. It is an acceptable method in certain circumstances, right? So that's where we delegated that to the county health officer because ultimately they're the ones that have the authority to make that decision.
I mean, the thing that the spot I'm thinking of, particularly at our facility, it's like our barn that we have our poultry and our rabbits in is like sandwiched just on either side of a real restroom, and then we're having to put these temporary sinks in. If then it's 50 feet away.
Yeah,
like,
no.
hand
So
sanitizer seems like it would be acceptable, and then say if you want to wash your hands, the bathroom's 50 feet that way.
The bathroom is acceptable. So it doesn't have to be right like in the middle of the exit door. It's near each area where they're housed, right? So as long as the signage is there that says, please wash your hands after leaving the barn, and the bathroom isn't going incognito, and hid by a bunch of shrubs and trying to hide itself, that is perfectly acceptable to say, to have a sign there that says wash your hands with an arrow pointing towards the restrooms, and leave it at that. We're not saying you have to really have anything there specifically in the entryway. It just has to be accessible and near that.
Hey, Kyle, our health officer doesn't like hand sanitizer because they think that it prevents people from actually washing their hands. They think it gives them like a false sense of cleanliness. So they don't like us to have them out. But we have hand washing stations, but they're not like directly at every barn. They're a good 50, 80 feet from everyone. We just say, when you exit the barns, wash your hands, and there's hand washing facilities nearby.
Thank you, Leah.
And I know that's one of the things. It seems like there's always a panic, like the day the fair's opening. Where's that sink? It's like, that's not required. Here's the sign.
And Leah's county may or may not have been the reason for the wording chosen in that rule.
Probably.
Okay, so the last one is just the compliance piece of basically assigning that essentially the exhibition organizer it is the one that's really responsible for doing that by way of the designated contact. So the designated contact ultimately is the one that we are doing the outreach with, that we are trying to explain all the rules to. They're the ones who ultimately are responsible for ensuring compliance. That doesn't mean they are held responsible for all compliance, right? If someone brings an animal that they know was sick and they hide that fact and bring it into the show, it's not the designated contact's fault. It's that exhibitor, right? That's the purpose of this rule, is just trying to spread that out, that ultimately it's the designated contact's responsibility to do things like retaining records, those kinds of things, but that's not limited just to them. This is another one of those rules that's there just to make the attorneys happy. And Sunny, with that is the end of my rules, the rules.
Awesome. Any other questions, comments? Morgan.
I do have a question about people are bringing in animals to exhibitions that are not associated with the exhibition, such as dogs and that sort of thing. Does it make sense to limit outside animals' access to those buildings? I know that Oregon Fairgrounds is a dog-friendly fairground, but does it make sense to exclude those dogs, except for in service animal situations, from those barns?
You're on mute, Ryan.
From a practical standpoint and a gold standard standpoint, absolutely. From the standpoint of trying to craft rules that are going to apply to every single exhibition from here on out ever held in this state, probably not. What I can say is these rules don't only apply to the animals entered in a show. If an event is defined as an exhibition, all of the animals present there potentially could fall under this, right? Only the exhibitors are, the exhibition is only required to keep the records of the animals that are there as part of the exhibition. But some of these other requirements would apply still. And so I think that's going to be a decision of each event, of whether they are going to allow those animals in the livestock holding areas, and whether how they're going to ensure that they're complying with these rules in their individual situation.
Okay.
You
Tim,
don't want to dogs from barns.
would be hard.
Yeah.
Tim, and then Veronica, and then Dr. Flint.
Oh, you're still muted,
There we
Tim.
go.
You
I had
pulled
to
a me.
unmute. I had to unmute. Sorry. So I don't want to regress a little bit on the lactating dairy cattle when
Mhm.
we have to stay 10 feet away from them when they're being milked, when those cattle are already being tested. Is that a little bit overkill? Not that we can't do it in our parlor, or flat barn, but it just seems a little bit overkill for me, especially when the milk never really hits the ground or anything. It goes into a machine, into the hose, into the pipeline, right into the tank.
Yeah, and so just a point of clarification, the 10 feet away is only if they're being milked in a stall or an area directly accessible by the public, right? So your parlor wouldn't be considered directly accessible, right? So this is more intended for the small count, the non-dairy counties that may have a single dairy cow that shows up that is going to end up being hand milked or milked on a portable machine in their tie stall in the aisleway, that they need to create some separation there so that you don't have, a member of the general public standing right at the back of that cow. The other reason for it, though, is the testing is not perfect. There is a period where an animal may be carrying the virus that we're not going to find it in the milk yet, and then there is an allowance of time prior to between when the sample is collected and the exhibition, just because things can't be done overnight, and so there is still a risk there. That milk is the single biggest risk factor for transmission. There is more virus in milk than there is in the saliva of a chicken that has died of the virus. And so it's an incredibly high risk profile there. And so that was trying to create some mitigations there while still doing that. I am hoping that we'll be past the dairy portion of this outbreak by this summer. We haven't really been seeing new cases. And if that's the case, we can remove all of those requirements, but as long as it's a risk, that it is probably gonna have to stay, because that is one of the USDA things too.
Okay, I appreciate that. So one more question just for my information. So
Mhm.
Tillamook has a program that you guys are working with, or they're working with ODA with. Does the other co-ops, in case we have other out of county cattle show up, do the other co-ops have that program going too?
Yeah, so that's that surveillance program that's referenced in number 5. We've got about 95% of the dairy, the grade A dairies in the state are participating in that. What we've run into in exhibitions, especially youth exhibitions, a lot of the dairy cattle that are shown are not necessarily coming from a grade A dairy. And so that's where we see dairy cattle that are having to be sampled and tested.
So if they just
We had very few dairy cattle that were being tested this summer for a show.
Okay, so if they tell us that they're at a co-op that's testing their milk, then that's good enough. They don't have to do the 10 days ahead. Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. And this summer, just from a practical standpoint, when exhibitions were registering with us, if they marked that they had dairy cattle, we were reaching out to them, having them send us a list of the exhibitors, and we were checking every exhibitor against that list for them, so that it wasn't really as long as you responded to the emails, it's not necessarily your responsibility to check each of those.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, Veronica, and then Dr. Flint.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that I appreciate the inclusion of having a veterinarian as part of this. I think if it were ever in the future, years from now, if rural veterinarian supply were to catch up to the need, I think the citizens would probably appreciate having a vet on site. We hear from quite a few folks who are concerned about those things, not just for disease control, but also for things like what Morgan mentioned with injuries and unintentional injuries that happen at various exhibitions. Having a veterinarian on site would put a lot of folks' mind at ease that animals could be relieved of suffering quickly in that case. But I think we're probably a few years away from being able to have a supply of vets to reasonably make that rule. But that would be a great goal to have from my point of view.
Yeah, thank you for that. And one thing I think I neglected to mention at the beginning of this, You may have noticed that these rules are very specific to infectious and communicable diseases. And that is because that is the authority that we have to create these rules under. So while I personally 100% agree with the other reasons to have a veterinarian on site, short of legislative action, the Department of Agriculture can't mandate a veterinarian be there for those other reasons, if that makes sense.
Okay, Dr. Flint and then Ellie.
Sales are an entirely different regulatory thing than an exhibition, right? Like these
Mhm.
rules don't apply to the small livestock sales or even some of the
Mhm.
horse sales that happen. There are bigger regulations for that.
Yeah, there are already regulations between the animal health program and the livestock brand program for auctions and those kinds of things that happen as a standalone thing.
Oh.
So yes.
Okay, great. And then as a designated veterinarian, which I got to be on Saturday for a horse exhibit, there's a lot of pressure. It was a very small exhibit. I was very intimately associated with it. But when you talk about being the veterinarian on record for great big shows, and then there is the perception that you are the person not releasing the goat with a broken leg, that is concerning to me. Like, I feel like that needs clarification. That is a show call. The designated veterinarian, as you just said, Ryan, is the infectious disease person, right? Like,
Yes,
unless you
correct.
have to have a more specific contract or something with that veterinarian to say when they come in for non-infectious disease problems. Like, that's a concern for
Yes.
public perception.
Yeah, and that's why we tried to be really specific on that, that it's that specific statement is only applying to livestock showing signs or symptoms of disease. And frankly, the reason for that is because, and I don't know if you got to experience this or not, because it was such a short term for this weekend, but our district veterinarians also reach out to the designated veterinarians of these exhibitions ahead of time to make sure that the designated veterinarian knows which of us is on call, knows how to get a hold of us, so that the idea is also that if a situation happens where, like, had you had a situation, Dr. Flint, this weekend where you have a horse developing neurologic signs, my hope is your first call would be to us and we become the bad guy saying, no, we are quarantining that facility. We are going to require this or that, and trying to keep you out of the middle of that also. But to kind of preserve that conduit for infectious disease stuff between you as a designated veterinarian and us. We are not implying anything else beyond the infectious disease stuff at this point. That is solely at the discretion of an individual exhibition and an individual veterinarian through whatever contractual means you may have.
They were great and very timely to reach out.
Perfect.
And veterinarians are glad to make you guys the bad guys. Sorry about that, but it's true.
You know, it is a fact of life that we all came to live with a long time ago. So
Ellie.
All right, I've got two quick clarification questions. So one, I double checked. I didn't see it in the definitions, but in the exhibition open to general public section, is there a definition for local health officer?
no, because that is a commonly held term within state statute. So that is an actual that's kind of like saying the state veterinarian, right? That is a position that is expressly created in statute in a general way. So every county has a designated health officer. It's your local public health.
Okay, just want to clarify on that. And then the other one, we talked about it a little bit at the very start, but the exhibition definitions in that section for number 2, defining exhibition. I did want to figure out for some of the events, I started thinking about it later. So we have occasionally workshops where kids are bringing in their animals for demonstration. If it's for educational purposes, I wasn't sure if that got lumped into it likely.
No. So again, we really consider that to be training, to be education, that kind of thing. Now, if you combine that with a, there are like boot camp type events that happen throughout the year, right? Where it's a combination of, you're going to have some seminars, you're going to have some trainings, but you're also going to put your animal in a pen and you're going to get a ribbon at the end of the day, or you're going to get placed, right? That would be an exhibition. At the end of the day, even those training events, like if you have multiple people coming together with their animals for the purpose of putting them in the pens throughout the weekend, you're commingling. These are probably things you should be doing, but we're not going to mandate it, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And again, it's never wrong to fill out the paperwork and tell us it's happening. We won't turn it away. We always appreciate knowing. The main reason behind the registration component of it is so that if something does happen, right, a week later, 2 weeks later, we find, we are investigating a disease report, and that owner tells us, yeah, I was at such and such, X show last weekend. The whole purpose of the registration is so we can go back through our records and find, okay, yeah, that show happened here. This was the person that was the responsible person. We can call them now. We can get the records. We can start that process. Whereas we've had cases in the past, especially with equine herpes, where it can take us days to, a week or more to trace back through, okay, we know it happened at this location, but we don't have a contact for the location. We know it was this group that hosted it. So you send an email to the info at whatever group email address, takes 2 days to get back to you, and they give you someone else's, and you just go through that. And meanwhile, our only recourse is to put out a press release saying anyone that was at this location or we end up having to do really broad control methods. And so we're trying to just be able to speed that process up.
And just one follow-up. So for any of these events, if it's the facility owner that it's their role to submit the initial report, then I'm thinking primarily fairgrounds. Are the fairgrounds managers or anything like that, are they like, how aware are they of it? Because I don't think that our fairgrounds manager necessarily submits all that much, so just want to check in on that kind of education piece.
Yeah, I'm going to let Leah jump in there, but in just a second. So that is a new requirement being added to this component, right? Because we found that was an issue over the last 2 summers, that it's kind of that confusion of who's actually responsible for which component of it. But go ahead, Leah.
Yeah, I would just say at the end of the day, the fairgrounds manager should be, and I mean, in our case, is highly involved. So we have an expectation that whether it's 4-H, FFA, or OPA class, that the superintendents of those areas or the 4-H agent, we're in constant communication with them about even the smallest things, like, oh, there's an animal that they suspect might be sick, we're calling in the vet. I mean, they're constantly communicating with me. So I just think that it's just a change in operation if that's not happening at your fairgrounds already.
And we've done a lot of outreach over the last couple months with the Oregon Fairs Association. I mean, I just had a call with them yesterday for the equine stuff. So that's part of the reason for making them the kind of the scapegoats for the registration piece, is because it is a defined group, right? I can go back through our records and find half a dozen equine facilities that host events throughout the state on a common basis and find contact for those. The fairgrounds are an easy group that I can get access to all of them quickly. And that was kind of the reason behind that, is we can go to that one group. They're the ones ultimately deciding whether an event is going to happen at a location or not. So they know who they're talking with, and they know the organization, they know the dates. They can send that to us, and then we can do all of the additional follow-up with whoever they tell us is the contact for that group that's hosting the event.
Yeah, and we require 4-H and FFA to provide all of their registration paperwork for all of their animals, so we keep it on site in the office for 3 years.
Not to get too far into the weeds and implementation, but one of the questions that I have just listening through all of this, looking at the form, at least for the horses, it really seems like it's for the event. Like, I don't know all
Yeah.
of the information on that form.
Nope. And the intent when these rules are filed is to have two separate processes, right? That you fill out a very basic form to notify, essentially a notification registration that it's happening, and give us your point of contact, and then we follow up with them to obtain the additional information.
So there'll be a separate form when it all comes down.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that is a piece, that is a component that was not present in the emergency rules we've done in the past. And it led to a fair amount of confusion. And so that's what we're trying to clear up, is to really specify who's responsible for which portions. So yeah, there will be essentially kind of a split registration. The form that you as a facility owner is responsible for will essentially be the event name, dates, the address of your facility, and the point of contact that you're for the event.
With that in mind, we get to the money part. If anybody has any feedback on how you think this would, and again, I mean, in this case, they're new rules, so to speak, more permanent than our temp rules in the past, but what the cost of compliance might be, or any fiscal or economic impact that you think this might have on anybody involved in these rules.
Well, there's definitely going to be staff time in administrating it. I don't know what that's going to look like. It depends on the amount of events you have and how complicated there are.
Yeah.
And like stinks, hand sanitizers, quarantine areas, arrangements for all of those are going to have some costs.
The cost of the veterinarian's time is a concern as well. I did speak to 2 different veterinarians, and usually they charge between $1,000 and $1,500 a day. And most of our club shows are barely break even, so that is a substantial financial complication.
Okay. Is there racial, oh, sorry, go ahead, Tim.
So it's a lot of the stuff we're already doing, the hand washing stations and things like that, but they're rented, so that will be a cost, and the vet is a cost. And signage probably isn't a lot, but that's definitely going to be one of the costs too.
Something that I didn't see in this, and it may be encompassed in the more broader rule section. I didn't see anything in this regarding penalties. So if there's non-compliance, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's because the animal health program under this chapter has specific penalty enforcement authorities pre-existing. So it's the same process that's followed for any of the rules. We're not necessarily specifying extra penalties. At this point in time today, we do not have civil penalty rules in place to issue civil penalties for non-compliances for any issues. That is something that will be coming. The Senate Bill 832 last year did provide civil penalty authorities. We are not, that'll be a separate rulemaking process to look at it. It is never the department's intention, though, to enforce rules through penalties, right? It's really our intention to enforce through education and outreach. So that's why really these rules are not intended to be enforced. They're intended to be
Followed.
followed. Yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. And really enforcement typically, like we are not planning on sending people around to exhibitions that we find out about to, do an inspection of records or any of that. Like, that's not what this program's about. It's enforcement would come through, like, if we have a disease outbreak and now you are refusing to provide the records, or you aren't able to provide records, or those kinds of things. That's really the intent of the rules.
So is there a section in this chapter that refers to the penalties?
Not
You
not
said
currently
there's-
because no, not currently because they're not proposed. So there's a rulemaking effort. I think we just posted the memo this week that'll be happening in January that will be the working through for all of the rules in this chapter, how that the civil penalties that were just the civil penalty authority becomes act from the legislature becomes active January 1st. And so that we'll be doing that rulemaking in January for essentially what that looks like, how that's calculated, how that is applied.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I like that approach that, it's not there to be a revenue source, right? It's there so that people know, like, you have to
Mhm.
comply with this. Like, you have the carrot, we're trying to do outreach and get people to follow this, but you got to have that thread a little bit too, so that you make sure, like, you have to do this. Otherwise, this is the result if you don't.
Yeah, and there are overarching limits on how civil penalties are used, how they're like what that money can be used for, where it goes. And honestly, we as an agency, at least in my program, typically if we are issuing a civil penalty, we are losing money on that. Like the intent is not to make money. By the time that you involve attorney fees and hearings and all that, we lose money doing that. The intent of those is to be the stick behind the carrot, essentially, because at the end of the day, they are laws that have to be followed.
My prior career was all in public works, and so we had in every one of our things it was usually like, we can shut your water off. So it's like
Mhm.
that's what got people to
Yep.
comply with stuff. Like, we didn't ever want to, but if they didn't
Yeah.
follow the rules, like, water's going off.
Okay. I recognize that we have gone over time, so if somebody has to leave, feel free. Otherwise, I really appreciate the conversation that we're having and have had. So Ellie, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, just as far as cost goes, looking forward, is the swab testing going to continue to be free?
Yeah, so the dairy cattle testing is paid for by USDA, and the swab testing for waterfowl, at least for the youth the youth exhibitions and those. Yes, that will continue as long as it's required. Will continue to be free. I don't know that we're still reevaluating what the trigger is for when we'll remove it, but that is not something we intend to do forever. So.
So I guess the only thing, if it's just the youth, then thinking open class for the adults, then, and I guess that there's youth there, but just kind of considering that there might be a cost there.
The other question that we are required to submit with this paperwork is how this might impact racial equity in the state. And so do these rules impact people of color any differently? Or would you expect that it might be a barrier for somebody in the BIPOC community? Any thoughts along those lines? Okay. So again, very much appreciate everybody's time. Take these into consideration. We'll be putting them out as proposed rules, which again starts that formal public comment opportunity. So once you see that those are published, share far and wide, good, bad, and the ugly. We want to hear it all. Very much believe in the public input process. These rules are here to protect your animals as well as your facilities and all of that. So I think it's really important for people to have a say in that. And then once that formal comment period has ended, there will be a report to the director that has written comments and how many verbal comments we received and kind of what those recommendations were. We either incorporate those comments if we can, or it's like, that's outside the scope of this rulemaking, but thank you for participating. And then the director has the ultimate say on what's adopted or not. And then again, all of that information is available on our rulemaking website and will be there for a year after the rules are adopted. Anything else on your end, Ryan?
Just to get to the street that
Awesome. And again, apologize for going over time, but really appreciate the engagement from everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Oh,
Hey,
Dr. Flynn?
Ryan, I have
Yeah.
a couple veterinary specific questions that I don't care if anybody hears. I just
Okay.
don't know if I should
Stay-
email those to you.
Stay on. Don't disconnect. We'll end the call, which will end the recording, and then yeah, we can talk through those if you want.
Thank you.
Yep.
Perfect.